Hey guys, tonight we step back, way back, to a time before memory foam. A journey you probably won't survive, honestly. Before you get comfy, like and subscribe only if you genuinely enjoy my work. Comment your location, time. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. And with full consciousness comes the dawning. Slightly desperate, awareness of bodily functions. That little morning urge. The one that sends you scurrying to a porcelain throne in your own time. Well, the porcelain is definitely missing here. And the throne. And probably the privacy. You'll be heading to a designated spot outside, if there is one. Or perhaps just a communal pot in the corner if the weather's truly awful. Not exactly a spa-like experience. It's one of those little details of daily life that we so rarely consider. The sheer logistics of basic sanitation before modern plumbing. A quirky little tidbit for you, some medieval castles had garderobes, which were basically toilets that emptied directly outside the castle wall, sometimes into the moat. Imagine being the poor soul fishing in that moat. Hope they weren't planning on catch of the day. For many, the midday meal is a practical affair, not a leisurely social gathering. If you're working the land, you probably carry your sustenance with you. You might find a spot of shade under a solitary tree, its leaves offering a dappled respite from the sun's glare. You reach into a rough spun cloth or a simple leather pouch. Inside, there's likely a hunk of dark, dense bread, the kind that really sticks to your ribs, not like that fluffy, airy stuff that vanishes like a mirage. Remember that bread we talked about, the cornerstone of so many diets? Here it is again, in its midday glory. Alongside it, perhaps a wedge of hard cheese, its flavor sharp and satisfying. An onion, pungent and crisp, might be your only vegetable, eaten raw like an apple. If you're lucky, there's a bit of dried meat, or maybe some leftover stew from the night before. Cold but still nourishing. You drink water from a skin, or perhaps some small beer. Thin and not particularly intoxicating, but safer than plain water in many places. It's a simple spread, eaten with hands that are still dusty from the morning's work. No fuss, no fanfare, just fuel. You know, back then, gluten-free probably just meant you were tragically out of bread. Now, if you're an artisan in a bustling workshop, your midday might look a little different. You might not leave your post for long. Perhaps your wife, or one of your children, brings a warm bowl, a thick vegetable soup, or a pottage bubbling with whatever grains and greens were available. You might eat it standing up, or perched on a stool. The sounds of the workshop, the hammering, the sawing, the chatter, providing the background ambiance. Sometimes there's a communal pot, everyone chipping in what they have, creating a sort of medieval potluck. It's efficient, and there's a certain camaraderie in sharing even a meager meal. It's amazing how a shared bowl of something warm can lift spirits, even if the something warm is mostly boiled barley. And for those in slightly more comfortable positions, say a merchant or a minor official, the midday meal could be a bit more elaborate. You might even have the luxury of a dedicated break, perhaps even returning home if your dwelling is close by. The food would be more varied, perhaps some roasted fowl if it's a good day, or fish if you're near a coast or river. There might be several types of bread, maybe even some with a finer flour. Vegetables would be more abundant, perhaps cooked with herbs from a well-tended garden, and the drink might be a better quality ale, or even wine, depending on your region and your purse. It's not quite a feast, not yet, but it's a definite step up from the field worker's pragmatic fare. The variation in food is, of course, immense, dictated by season, status, and geography. Much like the morning meal we touched upon, in the summer and autumn, fresh fruits and vegetables abound. Berries, apples, peas, beans, leafy greens. But come winter, the larder relies heavily on preserved goods. You see rows of pickled vegetables, salted meats, dried fruits, and bins of root vegetables stored in cool, dark cellars. This reliance on preservation is crucial. The Romans, for instance, were masters of food preservation, and their techniques for salting, drying, and pickling allowed their armies and cities to be fed year-round. That's a mainstream historical fact. For you, the prandium. Their midday meal was often light, consisting of bread, cold meats, fruit, and wine, easily consumed on the go. But the sheer ingenuity in making limited ingredients stretch is quite something. Historians still argue whether the invention of complex stews and pottages was a culinary choice or a direct result of needing to make tough meat palatable and scarce ingredients go further. It's a fascinating debate about resourcefulness versus refinement. You also find some rather interesting local delicacies. For a quirky tidbit, consider that in some parts of medieval Europe, roasted dormice, fattened on nuts, were considered a treat. Yes, tiny, roasted rodents. I'll just let you picture that. Suddenly, that onion doesn't seem so bad, does it? It's a good reminder that taste is incredibly subjective and deeply cultural. What's a delicacy in one era or region is, well, something else entirely in another. Imagine trying to order roasted dormouse on a modern food delivery app. The customer service queries alone would be legendary. The core of the midday meal, though, for most people, isn't about exotic flavors or elaborate presentation. It's about sustenance. It's about that crucial pause, that intake of calories that will power you through the second half of the day. You eat what's available, what's affordable, and what's practical. You eat with an awareness of the labor that produced the food and the labor that still lies ahead. The pace is unhurried, but not indulgent. There's a quiet mindfulness to it, a connection to the essentials of life. You finish your portion, perhaps wipe your mouth on your sleeve. Table manners are, shall we say, evolving, and feel that gentle warmth spread through you, a feeling of satiety that prepares you for the afternoon's challenges. The original power lunch probably involved actually having enough power left to get back to work. And with that, the midday refuel concludes, and the rhythm of the day prepares to shift once more. Hamabi, and just like that, the sun, that relentless celestial taskmaster, has climbed even higher, now beginning its slow, taunting descent towards the western horizon. It hangs there, a molten coin in the vast pale blue, baking the very air you breathe. The mornings, shall we say, invigorating. Start. Remember all that bright-eyed ambition we had with the Dawn Chorus? Well, that feels like a lifetime ago, doesn't it? Now, you're squarely in the grip of the afternoon drudgery. You look around again. Now that you're sitting up, the dim light reveals more. Maybe a rough wooden chest in the corner, holding all your worldly possessions. A few pots, perhaps, by a cold hearth. The floor is likely packed earth, cold and damp under your bare feet as you swing them off your sleeping pile. There's a certain, shall we say, rustic charm to it all if you squint really hard and have a terrible sense of smell. But mostly, it's just a reminder that waking up, for a vast majority of human history, wasn't the comfortable, clean, refreshing experience we've engineered it to be. It was gritty, it was smelly, and it was often shared with more than just your immediate family. Fleas, for instance, were common bedfellows, tiny, unwelcome, and very, very itchy. So if you're feeling a phantom itch right now, well, you're just getting into the spirit of things. Don't worry, it's probably just psychosomatic, probably. You find yourself back at it, whatever it was. Perhaps you're still in that seemingly endless field, the one we talked about earlier, where the rows of young plants stretch out like green, leafy demands. Your back, which was merely complaining a few hours ago, is now staging a full-blown protest. Each bend a fresh grievance. The hoe, or whatever simple yet stubbornly effective tool you're wielding, feels like an extension of your own weariness, heavy and uncooperative. The rhythm you found this morning, that almost meditative swing and chop, has dissolved into a sluggish, forced march. Chop, pull adz, step, ugh. It's the ancient equivalent of staring at a loading bar that's stuck on 98%. The heat. Oh, the heat. It's not just warming you, it's cooking you. Slowly, from the inside out. You can feel the sweat, no longer a refreshing dew, but a sticky, irritating film that coats your skin, making your rough-spun tunic cling in all the wrong places. Dust, kicked up by your own reluctant feet, or a stray puff of breeze, mixes with that sweat, creating a fine layer of grime. You'd probably pay a king's ransom for one of those fancy misters they have at theme parks now. Wouldn't you? Or maybe just a single, solitary ice cube. Just one. Imagine. And with the heat come the flies. They are the unwelcome soundtrack to your afternoon. A persistent, buzzing chorus that seems to delight in exploring your ears, your nostrils, the corners of your eyes. You swat, a listless, tired motion, but they're indefatigable. A tiny winged air force of pure annoyance. It's like they're hosting their own tiny, incredibly irritating podcast right next to your head. And the topic is always you. This is that part of the day, that specific challenge of the afternoon, where your mind starts to wander into truly bizarre territories just to escape the monotony. You might find yourself counting the pebbles in a square foot of soil, or intensely studying the life cycle of a particularly determined ant, or perhaps even trying to telepathically communicate with a nearby sheep. Ba means yes, right? Or is that just more existential dread? Fluffy. The sheep, of course, just choose, unimpressed by your burgeoning boredom-induced superpowers. Remember that little break you had for midday sustenance? The simple bread? The bit of cheese? Maybe some watered wine or ale. That brief respite is now a distant, pleasant memory, and in its place is the notorious post-meal slump. Your body, having diverted precious energy to digestion, now sends subtle and not so subtle signals that a nap would be an excellent idea. Your eyelids feel like they're weighted with lead. The sun's warmth, once just oppressive, now feels like a comforting, sleep-inducing blanket. It's a dangerous combination when there's still so much to do before dusk. In ancient Rome, they understood this dip. The hora nona, nes, or ninth hour around 3 p.m., was often a time when business might slow, or a break was taken, acknowledging that human batteries don't just run at full tilt all day. We could learn a thing or two, perhaps. The tasks themselves haven't changed, but your perception of them has. That fence post you were mending this morning, the one that needed just a little bit of shaping now. Every swing of the adze feels like you're trying to sculpt granite with a butter knife. The wool you're carding, preparing it for spinning, seems to multiply with every pass of the combs. A never-ending, fluffy cloud of obligation. It's fascinating, in a deeply unfascinating way, how the same job can feel so different depending on the time of day and your own dwindling reserves. You might catch yourself pausing, mid-motion, staring off into the middle distance, your mind a complete blank. It's not a restful blank, more of a system error blank. Reboot required. But the only reboot available is a swig of lukewarm water from your water skin, if you remember to refill it, that is, and a stern mental pep talk that usually goes something like, all right, self, just keep going. Because, well, because the alternative, of course, is not really an option, is it? Not if you want to eat tomorrow. It's interesting. This afternoon period, some folks in hotter climes, then and now, fully embraced the siesta, a proper, dedicated shutdown. But for many, especially in more temperate zones or during peak agricultural seasons, it was a case of powering through. There's a rather charming, lesser-known concept from medieval England. Not quite a full siesta, but something called shutting eye. It was a brief, almost unacknowledged moment of rest taken by field workers, maybe leaning on their scythe for just a minute or two. Eyes closed against the glare. Just a tiny reset button, pressed in the quiet hope that no one was looking too closely. A little act of rebellion against the tyranny of the sun and the endless work. The light is beginning to change now, ever so subtly. The harsh, direct glare of midday is softening. The shadows, which were short and sharp, are starting to lengthen, stretching like lazy cats. This brings its own challenge. For tasks requiring good light, fine mending, perhaps, or careful weeding to distinguish friend from foe in the vegetable patch, there's a new, gentle pressure. The clock is ticking, not a mechanical one, of course, but the great, slow-moving clock of the sun. You need to get this done before the light fails, before you're squinting and making mistakes that will only create more work for tomorrow. Oh, the irony. You might notice the sounds around you shifting too. The frantic buzzing of insects might lessen slightly as the worst of the heat passes. Birdsong might pick up again, a tentative evening serenade beginning. Or perhaps it's just that your own internal monologue of weariness has quieted enough for you to notice the world again. Historians still argue whether the concept of laziness as we understand it, with its moral connotations, truly applied to pre-industrial workers, or if their often slower, more deliberate pacing in these afternoon hours was simply a pragmatic, deeply ingrained response to their physical limits, the available nutrition, and workdays that were dictated by daylight rather than a punch card. Were they being lazy or just, not machines? It's a thought to ponder as you straighten your aching back for the 10th time in as many minutes. The thought of the day ahead doesn't exactly fill you with get up and go. It's more of a get up and get it over with kind of feeling. But you're awake, unwashed, uncomfortable, and in a world that doesn't particularly care about your thread count or your skincare routine. Welcome to the morning, such as it is. You've just emerged from whatever passed for your dwelling, that cozy little hovel we imagined earlier. The door, if you could even call it that, more like a loosely hung collection of hope and wicker, creaks shut behind you with a sound that's surprisingly final. You take your first tentative steps outside, and the world immediately assaults your senses in ways your 21st century nose, eyes, and, well, feet are just not prepared for. And so, you continue. One more row to weed. One more bundle of flax to scutch. One more load of wood to carry. The end of the workday is in sight. A shimmering, distant oasis. But there are still a few more miles of this particular desert to cross. You glance at the sun again, your silent, relentless overseer, and with a sigh that seems to carry the weight of centuries of toil, you bend once more to the task at hand. Just a little longer. That's what you tell yourself. Just a little longer. All right. So you've navigated the, shall we say, aromatic pathways of daily medieval hygiene. Or perhaps you've just finished pondering the subtle joys of a diet, largely consisting of bread and, well, more bread. Remember that slightly gray, dense loaf we talked about? Imagine that, day in, day out. Now, a different sort of decision looms, one that fundamentally shapes every waking and probably every sleeping moment. Where do you actually live? Do you throw your lot in with the bustling, noisy, and frankly rather fragrant confines of a town? Or do you opt for the seemingly endless green, the backbreaking labor, and the rustic charm of the countryside? It's a classic dilemma, really, like choosing between a streaming service with too many options or one that only shows documentaries about competitive cheese rolling. Both have their, unique appeals. Let's imagine you're considering town life first, as the sun, or what you can see of it between the overhanging upper stories of timber-framed houses, begins to filter down. The city doesn't so much wake up as it simply continues its ongoing low-level roar. Church bells are a given, of course, tolling out the hours for prayer, or perhaps just to remind everyone they're still alive. But beneath that, you hear the clatter of wooden shutters being thrown open, the rumble of cartwheels on uneven cobblestones, if you're lucky enough to have cobblestones and not just packed earth. Street vendors are already hawking their wares, their voices a practiced, penetrating cry designed to cut through the general hubbub. Fresh fish? Not two. Old fish. One might optimistically shout, you can smell the bakeries. A genuinely lovely aroma of yeast and warmth, but it's probably mingling with the less than lovely scent from the tanner's shop down the lane, or the open drainage channel that, in theory, carries waste away. In practice, it mostly just festers. You're close to everything and everyone. Your neighbor, whose window is practically within arm's reach, is likely already arguing with their spouse, providing your morning's entertainment. The big draw for many, especially if you're trying to escape the ties of the land, is opportunity. There's a famous saying, Stadtluft macht frei. City air makes you free. And it's a mainstream historical fact that in many towns, if a serf could live there for a year and a day without being reclaimed by their lord, they were considered free. Imagine that sigh of relief. You could apprentice yourself to a master craftsman, perhaps become a weaver, a cooper, a smith. The thud of hammers, the whir of looms, the sizzle of metal in the forge. These are the sounds of productivity, of goods being made and sold. Guilds, as we touched upon earlier, regulate these trades, offering a sense of community, quality control, and, let's be honest, a way to keep competition firmly in its place. It's not exactly a fast track to becoming a medieval Jeff Bezos, but it's a path. But, oh, the downsides. All those wooden houses, packed cheek by jowl, a stray spark from a hearth, a dropped candle, and you've got an inferno that can sweep through entire districts. Firefighting involves a lot of shouting and buckets, not exactly reassuring, and disease. Well, with everyone living so close, sharing dubious water sources, and even more dubious sanitation, illnesses can spread with terrifying speed. Remember, those less than ideal hygiene practices magnify their impact in a crowded urban environment. And then there are the animals, not just the horses and oxen pulling carts, but the pigs. Ah, the urban pig. A quirky little tidbit for you. Many medieval towns had specific ordinances about pigs. They were useful, you see, wandering the streets and eating refuse, a sort of four-legged oinking sanitation department. But they also, predictably, got underfoot, caused damage, and were generally a bit of a nuisance, leading to rules about when and where they could roam, or if they needed rings in their noses to stop them from rooting up the, pavement. So, progress, but with oinks. Now, let's drift out beyond those city walls, past the gatehouse where the guards are probably half asleep or extorting a small toll from a passing farmer. You venture into the countryside. The first thing that hits you is the sheer expanse. Fields stretch out, a patchwork of cultivated strips, pasture land, and woodland. The air, while not exactly pristine by modern standards, hello, manure, feels cleaner, thinner, instead of a cacophony of human noise. You hear the crow of a distant rooster, the lowing of cattle, the rustle of wind through crops or trees. Your morning alarm is the sun itself, or perhaps the less than gentle prodding of your spouse, because the cows won't milk themselves. Life here is dictated by the seasons, an unyielding rhythm of plowing, sowing, tending, and harvesting. The work is hard, physical, from dawn till dusk. There's a directness to it, though. You grow the food, or help grow the food, that you and your community depend on. Your connection to the land is absolute. Your home is likely a small wattle and daub hut, perhaps with a thatched roof that, like we mentioned with peasant housing, does an okay job of keeping the rain out. Mostly, you're part of a village, a smaller, tighter community where everyone knows everyone else's business, which can be both a comfort and a curse. If your sheep wander off, the whole village might help you look. If you have a dispute with a neighbor, well, everyone will have an opinion. The dangers are different here. You're less likely to die in a massive urban fire. But famine is a constant shadow. A bad harvest, too much rain, too little rain, a blight, and suddenly your carefully stored grain isn't enough. You're also more exposed. While the city has its walls and guards, a remote village can be vulnerable to bandits, or even soldiers from a rival lord looking to cause a bit of trouble and, ahem, requisition supplies. Isolation itself can be a danger. If you fall ill or get injured far from the village, help might be a long time coming. Let's talk about the ground beneath you. Forget smooth asphalt. Forget neatly paved sidewalks with those little tactile paving bits for the visually impaired, a concept centuries away. Bless their future hearts. What you're treading on is likely a packed earth affair, or if you're in a slightly more, shall we say, upscale area of a burgeoning town, you might encounter some haphazardly laid cobblestones. These aren't the charming, Instagram-worthy cobblestones of a quaint European village you're picturing. Oh no, these are ankle-twisting, cartwheel-swallowing monstrosities, unevenly settled, with delightful gaps just waiting to trip the unwary traveler. You quickly learn the ancient shuffle, a kind of careful, probing step, less a walk and more a continuous negotiation with the terrain. So, where's the better life? The town offers a certain kind of freedom, a wider variety of experiences, more people, more stuff, but it's also a petri dish of potential disasters, noisy and expensive. The country offers a connection to nature, a potentially stronger sense of immediate community, and perhaps a bit more breathing room, literally. But it's a life of relentless toil, often under the thumb of a local lord, with its own set of anxieties. Historians still argue whether the average peasant found more personal autonomy within the structured confines of a guild, with its rules and hierarchies, but also its collective bargaining power, or in the seemingly freer, yet lord-dominated, rural landscape where custom and the agricultural calendar were king. It really depends on what kind of medieval stress you'd prefer. I suppose the stress of a collapsing tenement or the stress of a collapsing wheat price, tough call. Each offers a unique tapestry of smells, sounds, and daily struggles, a world away from our own, yet with echoes of the same human desire for security, community, and maybe just a slightly less of a pungent existence. So, after all that talk of toil, whether it's the backbreaking labor in the fields we pictured, or the perhaps more mentally taxing, but still demanding, life within those castle walls, you might be wondering, what did people do for fun? Did they just stare at a turnip and call it a day? Well, not quite. Even in a world without Wi-Fi or, basic sanitation in many places, the human need for a bit of a laugh, a thrill, or just a pleasant distraction was very much alive. Let's peek into how you might unwind, medieval style. If you're fortunate enough to be of noble birth, your leisure options are, shall we say, a bit more curated and expensive. Hunting, for instance, isn't just a way to get venison for the table. It's a grand social affair. You're out there on your finest horse with a pack of specially bred hounds, perhaps even a prized falcon on your gloved fist. Hunting was a vital social and political activity for the nobility, not just sport, but a display of wealth, skill, and control over land. You and your companions thunder through the forest, the calls of the horn echoing, the baying of dogs a thrilling soundtrack. It's about the chase, the skill, the camaraderie, and, let's be honest, showing off your rather splendid hunting attire. You might spend days, even weeks, on these excursions, a mobile party of sorts, far from the, shall we say, aromatic sea, realities of urban life we touched upon earlier. Then there are tournaments. Oh, the tournaments. Imagine the scene, colorful banners fluttering in the breeze, the glint of polished armor, the roar of the crowd. You're either a participant, feeling the heft of your lance, the adrenaline coursing as you eye your opponent across the tilt yard, or you're a spectator, perhaps a lady in a fine silk gown, bestowing a favor upon your chosen knight. It's the Super Bowl, the Olympics, and a fashion show all rolled into one, with a slightly higher chance of someone actually getting impaled. Though, for the most part, jousts were meant to be a display of skill, not a fight to the death. Blunted lances were often used, the aim being to break your lance on your opponent's shield or, even better, unhorse them. It's all very chivalrous, very dramatic, and occasionally, someone gets a splinter the size of a baguette. Good times. And after all that outdoor exertion, feasting, of course. Remember those grand halls? They weren't just for serious political discussions. They were for serious eating and serious entertainment. While you're tucking into roasted swan, yes, really, or a particularly elaborate, jellied something. There are minstrels playing lutes and pipes, their tunes weaving through the chatter. A jester, in his motley attire, might be tumbling or cracking jokes, some of which might even be funny. Though humor, like fashion, changes. Storytellers would recite epic poems, tales of valor and romance, transporting you to mythical lands, all without a single CGI dragon. But what if you're not a lord or lady? What if your days are spent guiding a plow, or hammering iron in a smithy, or perhaps selling slightly questionable meat pies in that bustling marketplace we visited? Your leisure is likely tied to the rhythms of the agricultural year and the church calendar. Holy days, holidays are your main opportunities for a break, and these aren't just solemn religious observances. Villages erupt in celebration. There might be a fair, with stalls selling trinkets and treats. Perhaps a traveling show with a dancing bear PETA would have a field day, and rightly so. You'd gather on the village green for games. Archery contests are popular, not just for fun, but because it's a useful skill. Remember those longbows. You might see wrestling matches, foot races, or even a game of early football. Now, when I say football, don't picture 22 finely tuned athletes on a pristine pitch. Picture chaos. Mob football, as it was sometimes called, could involve entire villages, dozens or even hundreds of people, brawling over an inflated pig's bladder, with goals miles apart and very few rules. It was rough, it was rowdy, and it probably resulted in more than a few sprained ankles and black eyes. It makes modern rugby look like a tea party. Simpler games abound too. You might find folks engrossed in a game of nine men's Morris, its lines scratched into a wooden board or even the earth, using pebbles as pieces. Dice games are ubiquitous, played in taverns and homes, often accompanied by a bit of friendly or not so friendly wagering. Skittles. A forerunner of bowling, provides a satisfying clatter as wooden pins tumble. Children, then as now, had their own games. Tag, hide and seek. Games with dolls or carved wooden animals. The instinct to play is universal. After all, music and storytelling aren't exclusive to the nobility either. In the evenings, families might gather around the hearth, the firelight casting dancing shadows, and listen to someone sing a ballad or recount a local legend. Traveling entertainers, the jongleurs and minstrels, weren't just for castle halls. They'd perform in village squares and at fairs, bringing news, songs, and a bit of wonder from the outside world. They might juggle, perform acrobatics, or even put on puppet shows. It's live entertainment, unplugged, and utterly captivating in its own way. Imagine the medieval equivalent of binge watching, but instead of Netflix, it's a cycle of mystery plays performed over several days by local guilds, depicting biblical stories from creation to Judgment Day, probably with fewer cliffhangers involving who shot J.E.R. You might also find yourself enjoying the more intellectual pursuits. Chess, which arrived in Europe from the East, became incredibly popular among those who had the time and inclination for strategic thinking. Backgammon, or tables, as it was often called, was another favorite. These weren't just idle pastimes. They were seen as exercises for the mind. Imagine your favorite street, the one with that one persistent pothole the council swears it's going to fix. Now, imagine that entire street is the pothole. That's more like it. After good rain, which, let's be honest, happens, these paths transform into glorious mudslicks. We're talking shoe stealing, dignity robbing quagmires. Your brand new, by ancient standards, leather turn shoes. Consider them pre-distressed, and if it's dry dust, a fine, pervasive dust that coats everything: your clothes, your hair, the inside of your nostrils. It rises in little puffs with every step, a constant, gritty companion. You'll be tasting the road for dinner, a sort of involuntary seasoning. You know, the Romans were famous for their roads. Quite rightly so. They built over 50,000 miles of them. These incredibly engineered marvels like the Appian Way, designed for military efficiency and lasting for centuries. Those were the arteries of the empire, the intercity highways. Of course, the very concept of leisure as distinct from work is something historians still argue whether the sharp distinction often drawn between work and leisure truly reflected the lived experience of most medieval people, especially peasants whose lives were so dictated by agricultural cycles. For many, moments of fun were snatched amidst ongoing responsibilities, or seamlessly blended, like singing while you worked or sharing stories during a communal task. It wasn't always about clocking off at 5 and heading to the pub. More like, the sun's gone down. The sheep are mostly accounted for. Let's see if Griselda has brewed any of that turnip wine she was experimenting with. You take your fun where you can find it, adapting to the world around you. Because even in the shadow of hardship, the human spirit, it seems, just really wants to have a good time. The last rays of sun, those ones that always seem a bit more golden, a bit more tired, are slanting through the window, painting long, soft stripes across the wooden floor. You can hear the distant, muffled sounds of the day finally giving up, replaced by the closer, more intimate symphony of an evening meal in preparation. Remember that slightly singed smell from the kitchen earlier? Well, it's intensified now, hopefully in a good way, mingling with the scent of herbs and something slow-cooked and hearty. This is supper time. The main event after a long day? Not just a refueling stop like that quicker midday bite we saw. You find yourself drawn towards the dining area, perhaps a separate room if the household is reasonably well off, or simply the main communal space where the largest table sits. The air here is thick with anticipation. The table itself is probably sturdy, made of dark wood, perhaps a little battered from years of use. Much like that old chair in your grandparents' house that everyone secretly loves best. It might be bare, or covered with a linen cloth, its whiteness a stark contrast to the dimming light. You see places being set, not with the almost overwhelming array of cutlery we sometimes face at a fancy modern dinner, but with a more utilitarian simplicity. A spoon, almost certainly. A knife for sure. Personal knives were common, carried by individuals, a bit like carrying your own reusable straw today, only significantly more stabby. Forks. Well, that depends. For a long time, they were viewed with suspicion, an Italian affectation, almost foppish. So, you might just have your fingers, a spoon, and a shared trencher of bread to assist you. The household dynamics at supper are a masterclass in unspoken hierarchy. You watch as the head of the household, usually the father, takes his seat, invariably at the head of the table. It's not just a comfortable chair, it's a throne in miniature. His pronouncements, should he choose to make any, carry the weight of, well, the guy who brings home the bacon, or whatever the historical equivalent of bacon was. Perhaps salted pork, which, let's be honest, is just bacon's less glamorous ancestor. His portion of food will likely be the choicest, served first. Then, the seating often follows a clear pecking order. Other important males, the lady of the house, then down through the ranks of children, from oldest to youngest. It's a visual representation of everyone's place in this little world. If there are guests, their seating relative to the host is a crucial indicator of their status. Remember the phrase, to sit below the salt. That's a very real historical marker. The salt cellar, often an ornate piece, was placed in the middle of the table, and to be seated below, it meant you were of lesser importance than those above it. Quite the social navigation, and you thought choosing where to sit at a wedding reception was stressful. The food itself arrives. Perhaps a large, steaming pottage or stew, bubbling with vegetables, grains, and whatever meat was available. It's economical, it's filling, and it can simmer away for hours, which is handy when you're also, trying to avoid being conquered or dying of the plague. Bread is almost certainly there, coarse and dense, perfect for soaking up the juices. There might be cheese, some fruit if in season, or preserved items from the autumn harvest. It's a far cry from your delivered pizza or meticulously meal-prepped Tupperware. Isn't it? The emphasis is on sustenance, on shared resources, though sharing often had its limits dictated by who you were. Conversation, if it happens, is often subdued. Children are generally expected to be seen and not heard. A philosophy many modern parents might occasionally, just occasionally, find appealing after a long day of whys. The men might discuss matters of business, local news, or the state of the crops. The women, if they speak amongst themselves, might touch upon household concerns. It's not always a lively debate club. Sometimes, the only sounds are the clinking of spoons against pottery, the tearing of bread, and the soft chewing. A kind of companionable silence, or perhaps a weary one. Now, let's talk etiquette, because this is where things get specific. You might think table manners are universal, but oh, you'd be mistaken. Variations abound, not just through time, but by social class and even individual household. While we might fret about elbows on the table, they might have been more concerned with which hand you used to take salt from the common cellar. Left hand was often a no-go for anything communal, for reasons we discussed regarding hygiene, or lack thereof, in other contexts. Wiping your greasy fingers on your clothes. Probably frowned upon, though a napkin, if provided, was your friend. And don't even think about throwing bones on the floor. Well, actually, in some periods and places, that was perfectly acceptable. Dogs were often underfoot, eager to assist with cleanup. A quirky little tidbit for you trenchers: those slabs of stale bread used as plates were sometimes eaten at the end of the meal by the diner if they were still hungry, or, more often, given to the poor or to the dogs. Talk about zero waste living, though perhaps not the most appetizing epilogue to your meal, but the local capillaries, the little streets and alleyways within towns and villages. They often didn't receive the same level of investment or meticulous construction. So, as you mince your way forward, be grateful for every slightly less wobbly stone. It's like the universe's way of telling you to slow down and appreciate the small things, mostly because if you speed up, you'll definitely fall flat on your face. You'll notice no one is scrolling through their phone. Shocking. I know. Eye contact, or the careful avoidance of it, is part of the interplay. Reaching across someone for a bit of bread could be a minor diplomatic incident. Historians still argue whether the increasingly elaborate table manners that developed, especially from the Renaissance onwards, were driven more by a genuine concern for hygiene, or if they were primarily a way for the elite to distinguish themselves from the common folk. Perhaps it was a bit of both, a way to say, I am so refined, I don't even breathe on the communal butter. Imagine trying to navigate this. You use your spoon for the stew, your knife to cut a piece of cheese, and your fingers to pop it in your mouth. You try to look composed, not too eager, not too slow. You take a sip from a communal drinking vessel, trying very hard not to think about who drank from it last, or whether they had that sniffle you heard earlier. It makes you appreciate your own water bottle, doesn't it? And if you accidentally belch. Well, depending on the era and company, it might be an unforgivable sin or just a sign you enjoyed your meal. Good luck figuring out which one applies tonight. The pressure is immense, almost as immense as the desire to just ask if anyone has any ketchup for this surprisingly bland turnip. The meal progresses, a slow rhythm of serving, eating, and observing. The light outside has probably faded completely now, and the room is lit by the flickering glow of candles or a crackling fire, casting dancing shadows on the walls and faces. It creates an intimacy, a sense of a world shrunk down to this single shared experience. Even with all the rules and hierarchies, there's a fundamental human act at its core, breaking bread together. And as the plates or trenchers are gradually emptied, a sense of quiet satisfaction, or perhaps just resignation that the turnip stew is all there is, settles over the room. The main event of the evening is drawing to a close, making way for whatever quiet pursuits or early bedtimes the night might hold. You take one last look around, trying to memorize the subtle cues, the unwritten rules, the way a simple meal can say so much about a time and its people. And just like that, the sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky in those final, fleeting strokes of orange and purple we talked about earlier, before it fully commits to its disappearing act. Now, the world around you undergoes a profound transformation. Night falls, and with it, a whole new set of anxieties begin to stir. Like uninvited guests at a party you definitely didn't plan, the most immediate change, of course, is the profound lack of light. Your eyes, bless their little optic nerves, are trying their best, but mostly they're just showing you reruns of Shadow Puppet, Theater Existential Dread Edition. Every familiar shape from daytime, that friendly old tree, the path you walked with such confidence, morphs into something alien, something potentially menacing. Is that a bush? Or is it patiently waiting to ask you about your cart's extended warranty? The ambiguity is palpable. You strain to see, and the effort itself is tiring. A constant, low-level hum of vigilance that frays the nerves. Even the air feels different, doesn't it? Cooler, yes, but also heavier somehow. pressing in. It carries sounds with an almost unnerving clarity. The snap of a twig in the distance, the rustle of leaves that could be the wind. Or, well, your imagination is more than happy to fill in the blanks, usually with something that has far too many teeth. That campfire you so diligently built, the one we discussed maintaining. It's your beacon, your tiny island of warmth and flickering orange in an ocean of black. But it's a double-edged sword. It pushes back the immediate darkness, creating a small, cozy circle. But it also makes the shadows beyond seem deeper, more impenetrable. And, let's be honest, it's a giant "we are here" sign for anything, or anyone, with less than friendly intentions. You find yourself peering into the inky blackness, wondering what gazes back. It's a primal fear, this dread of the unseen, something hardwired into us from a time when the things that went bump in the night often did so with dinner in mind. Without the sun, your world shrinks dramatically. Those ambitious plans for, say, sorting your extensive collection of interesting-looking pebbles, probably on hold. Most work, especially anything requiring fine detail or broad visibility, grinds to a halt. Travel, unless absolutely critical, becomes a fool's errand. You remember how you navigated by landmarks during the day. Now, those landmarks are just vaguely more solid patches of black. Trying to find your way is like playing pin the tail on the donkey. Only the donkey is the concept of safety, and you're pretty sure the pin is just going to find your own foot. The quality of light, when you can get it, is variable. Moonlight, if the clouds are kind, can be surprisingly bright, casting silvery sheens on the landscape. But it's fickle. One passing cloud and you're plunged back into near total darkness. Starlight offers a gentler, more diffuse glow, enough to prevent you from walking directly into a tree. Usually, torches. They sputter, they smoke, they drip hot, sticky pitch, which is just delightful if it lands on you, and they advertise your presence for miles. Plus, they consume precious fuel. An oil lamp, if you're fortunate enough to possess one, and the oil to feed it, offers a more stable, albeit still limited, light. You guard that flame like it's the last piece of chocolate in the house. Historically, this lack of reliable, widespread light-shaped entire societies. Many towns and cities enforced a curfew, which comes from the Old French couvre-feu, literally meaning cover fire. It was an order for people to extinguish their fires and lights at a certain hour, partly to prevent accidental blazes in tightly packed wooden structures, and partly for, shall we say, social control. Keeps the riffraff off the streets, or so the thinking went. You can imagine the eerie quiet, the sudden plunge into near universal darkness across a whole settlement. It's a far cry from our modern world, where even a power outage feels like a major event, and we can just whip out our phones for an instant flashlight, complaining that the Wi-Fi is down. Perspective, eh? This leads us directly to the ever-present concern: security. Night is the ally of those who wish to move unseen. That sturdy shelter you helped construct, the one with the reasonably well-fitted door. It feels a lot more important now, doesn't it? You check the fastenings, perhaps wedge an extra piece of wood against it, just in case. Every creak of the structure, every sigh of the wind against its walls, is magnified 100-fold. Your senses are on high alert. That distant hoot could be an owl, could be a very dedicated, albeit slightly off-key, opera singer practicing their scales. At night, in the woods, perfectly normal. Or it could be a signal. The uncertainty is the real challenge. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. Or rather, the smell in the air. Oh, the smells. You thought your gym bag after a week of neglect was bad, sweet summer child. This is an olfactory tapestry woven from notes of things you'd rather not contemplate. There's no municipal waste collection, no neatly bagged trash picked up twice a week with those charming, noisy trucks. Waste, animal, human, vegetable, tends to accumulate. It might be tossed into the street, or into a nearby ditch, or perhaps a designated midden heap if the community is feeling particularly organized, which wasn't always a given. So, you've got the ripe, earthy aroma of decomposing organic matter, a constant reminder of life's less glamorous cycles. Add to that the pungent smell of wood smoke from countless cooking fires, a smell that clings to everything, a sort of ancient eau de cologne. If your idea of cologne is recently smoked herring, if you're part of a group, there's the watch. Someone, or several someones, has the unenviable task of staying awake, of peering into that oppressive darkness, trying to distinguish a threat from a shadow, a predator from a passing deer. It's a heavy responsibility. Their vigilance is what allows others a few precious hours of uneasy sleep. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for massive city gates, like those you might find in ancient Rome or medieval European towns, closing so firmly at dusk was purely for defense against external armies, or if it was equally about controlling the internal population, preventing crime, and managing the flow of goods and people under the difficult conditions of night. It's likely a bit of both, a complex tapestry of fear and control. And then there are the less conventional security measures. A quirky little tidbit for you in some cultures. People would hang specific herbs or objects, like rowan branches or iron horseshoes, above their doors or windows at night. The belief was that these items had protective properties, capable of warding off evil spirits, mischievous sprites, or even less supernatural, but equally unwelcome night visitors. Did it work? Well, if you believe it works, perhaps that's half the battle, offering a sliver of psychological comfort when the shadows press in. It's certainly cheaper than hiring a full-time security detail with very pointy sticks. So, you huddle closer to your companions, if you have them. There's a primal comfort in shared vulnerability, in knowing you're not facing the encroaching dark entirely alone. You listen, you wait, you hope that the sounds you hear are just the ordinary groans of the world settling down for the night, and not the prelude to something more active. The darkness itself becomes a presence, a character in your ongoing story, one that demands respect, caution, and a very, very good listening ear. Because out there, in the unlit expanses, dangers, both real and imagined, are definitely on the rise. And if you hear someone whispering your name, it's probably just the wind. Or, you know, that one neighbor who really wants to borrow your last cup of sugar, even at 3 a.m. Boundaries, people, sweet dreams, if you can manage them. The last embers in the hearth are fading, casting long, dancing shadows across the rough-hewn walls of your dwelling. The day, with all its toil and occasional fleeting joys, perhaps that slightly less watery ale we imagined earlier, is finally drawing to a close. It's time to consider something we modern folk often take for granted, a good night's sleep. Or perhaps just a night's sleep. So, are you ready to see how you'd be sleeping soundly in the medieval period? Or more likely, not so soundly. Let's begin with where you lay your weary head. If you're one of the vast majority, a peasant farmer or a simple laborer, your sleeping arrangements are communal. Very communal. Remember that small and smoky hut we peeked into? You're likely sharing a single room, not just with your spouse and children, but perhaps even with a few prized animals huddled in for warmth and safety on particularly cold nights. Yes, the chickens might still be clucking softly nearby. Your bed. It might be a simple pallet of straw on the packed earth floor, or if you're a bit better off, a rough wooden frame stuffed with more straw or perhaps even chaff. These straw mattresses, by the way, are the original organic bedding Though forget memory foam. This is more like memory of every lump and the occasional lost button foam, and they need frequent changing. Otherwise, well, things start to grow and crawl. If you're an artisan or a merchant in a town, you might have a dedicated sleeping chamber, perhaps even a separate bed for yourself and your spouse. This bed could be a wooden frame, possibly with ropes or leather straps stretched across to support a mattress. Said mattress is an upgrade from plain straw, perhaps wool, or if you're quite prosperous, feathers. Sounds cozy, but these feather beds could be surprisingly lumpy and heavy, requiring a good, vigorous fluffing each morning. Your apprentices and servants. They might sleep on truckle beds, low beds on wheels that are conveniently rolled under your grander bed during the day, or perhaps on simpler pallets in the hallways or even the kitchen, close to the dying embers of the fire. Now, if you're nobility, then we enter the realm of the magnificent four-poster bed. This isn't just a status symbol, though it certainly is, that often ornately carved and draped with expensive fabrics like velvet or silk. Those heavy curtains surrounding the bed are incredibly practical. They provide a vital layer of insulation against the notoriously drafty stone walls of your castle or manor house. Remember how cold those great halls could get? The curtains trap your body heat, creating a warmer or more private microclimate. Privacy, even within your own chamber, was a luxury. These curtains also offered a shield from prying eyes, as even high-status bedrooms weren't always entirely private spaces, with attendants sometimes sleeping in the same room. This type of elaborate curtained bed for the wealthy is a mainstream historical fact you'll see depicted often. The comfort level, even for the wealthy, is a far cry from your modern Tempur-Pedic. Linen sheets, if you can afford them, feel relatively smooth against the skin, certainly better than rough wool. Woolen blankets provide warmth. Pillows, often cylindrical bolsters or smaller, softer pillows, support your head. And here's a quirky little tidbit. Many medieval illustrations show people sleeping almost propped up in a semi-sitting position, bolstered by numerous pillows. Some suggest this was due to medical beliefs about digestion, perhaps to prevent apoplexy, or because chronic coughs and respiratory issues from smoky interiors were common. Lying flat might have felt too much like lying in one's coffin for some or, maybe they just really liked a good stack of pillows before it was cool. Now, let's talk about what might disturb your slumber. Forget the gentle hum of your refrigerator or the distant siren. Medieval nights are alive with their own unique soundscape. Inside, if you're in a shared space, there's snoring, lots of snoring, coughing, the rustle of straw as someone turns over, the soft whimpers of a child. Outside, especially in towns, the noises continue. The town watchman calling out the hour. All's well, even when it probably wasn't. Let's be honest. Dogs barking at shadows, the occasional late-night reveler stumbling home, perhaps singing a less than melodious tune. And early, very early, the sounds of the world waking up, carts rumbling over cobblestones, the blacksmith starting his day, animals being led to market. Then there are the less audible, but perhaps more intrusive, guests. Your medieval bedmates aren't just your family, they're a whole ecosystem. Fleas, lice, and the dreaded bedbugs are constant companions, an accepted part of life. Remember our earlier discussions about hygiene? Yeah, that extends to your sleeping quarters. Regular bathing wasn't common, and laundering bed linens, especially heavy woolen blankets, was an arduous task. So, you scratch a lot. Sharing is caring. Right, especially when it comes to tiny biting things. Historians still argue whether the constant battle with vermin significantly impacted sleep quality and overall health. or if it was just an accepted, albeit itchy norm that people somehow became desensitized to. Mapade, depending on where you are. You might get a whiff of a nearby tannery, with its delightful bouquet of curing hides and chemicals that could strip paint. Or perhaps a dyer's workshop, equally fragrant with fermented plant matter or, other nitrogen-rich ingredients we won't detail before dinner. And what about smells? Oh, the smells. With no indoor plumbing, chamber pots are a fixture in or near the bedroom. These are emptied in the morning, hopefully promptly, but overnight, well, that subtle midnight aroma. Oh, does someone really needed to go? Romantic, isn't it? Add to that the lingering sense of cooking, if you're in a one-room dwelling, the smell of unwashed bodies, damp wool, and perhaps even livestock if they're sharing your space. Air fresheners are centuries away, so you breathe it all in. You just try to acclimate. Light, or the lack thereof, is another factor. Once the fire dies down, or the single rush light is extinguished because leaving it burning all night is a serious fire hazard, especially with all that straw and wood around. It's dark, properly dark. Moonlight filtering through a small unglazed window or a horn pane might be your only illumination. This profound darkness could be comforting to some, a blanket of quiet, but terrifying to others, especially with prevailing beliefs in spirits, demons, and things that go bump in the night. Every creak of the house, every rustle in the thatch, takes on a more sinister meaning. Security is also on your mind. While violent home invasions weren't an everyday occurrence for most, the fear of robbery or intruders was real. Doors are bolted, shutters are latched, but a determined thief, well, let's just hope your dog is a light sleeper, or that the Lord's men patrol diligently. So, as you try to drift off, nestled in your straw, feathers, or fine linen, surrounded by the sights, sounds, and smells of the medieval night, you might find sleeping soundly to be a rather ambitious goal. Perhaps snatching a few hours of fitful rest is a more accurate description. It makes you appreciate your quiet, clean, pest-free bedroom a little more, doesn't it? The ability to control your environment, temperature, light, sound, is a modern luxury we seldom pause to consider. But here, in the deep past, sleep is a far more rustic affair. You do your best, huddle for warmth, scratch when you must, and pray for a quiet dawn, hoping that at least the rooster oversleeps. And so, as the chill of the pre-dawn air begins to seep even through the thickest of curtains, or the most communal of huddles, your medieval night draws towards its inevitable, and probably very early conclusion. The world outside your eyelids, whether they were truly closed in deep slumber or merely resting lightly, is beginning to stir once more, with the familiar, and perhaps not entirely unwelcome, sounds of a new day beginning its slow, laborious unfolding. The dreams, if any manage to pierce the veil of discomfort and disturbance, begin to fade like mist in the morning sun, leaving behind only the faintest residue of their passing, wisps of forgotten anxieties or fleeting, strange joys. You feel the cool draft on your face, a gentle but persistent reminder that warmth is a precious, fleeting commodity, and the demands of the day, with all its uncertainties and toils, will soon call you forth. It's almost time to leave this shadowy, restless world of medieval sleep behind, carrying with you just the lingering sensations, the ghostly echoes of a night spent so very differently from your own. The night is almost over now, fading, shh. And animals, of course. Chickens scratching in the dirt, pigs rooting around for tasty morsels, often in that aforementioned waste, creating a rather efficient, if unhygienic, recycling system. the occasional goat bleating indignantly. Each contributes its own unique note to the symphony. It's an experience, one that modern air fresheners simply cannot prepare you for. You'd think that with all this, people would be constantly ill, and they often were. But it's a quirky tidbit that some ancient cities actually had fairly sophisticated water and sewer systems, like the Cloaca Maxima in Rome, initially an open channel, later covered. But these were the exceptions, grand projects of powerful states. For many, out of sight, out of mind, often meant into the nearest convenient depression in the road. This rich miasma is your constant companion. You breathe it in, deeply, because you have to. There's no escaping it. You might even, after a while, become somewhat nose-blind to the worst of it. Your brain heroically filtering out the perpetual background pong just so you can function. Or maybe not. Maybe you just walk around with a permanently wrinkled nose, perfecting a look of mild disgust that becomes your default expression. Historians still argue whether the inhabitants of these pre-modern towns were truly desensitized to these smells, or if they simply endured them as an unavoidable aspect of life, perhaps occasionally perfuming themselves with strongly scented oils, or carrying nosegays of herbs to offer a brief, fragrant respite. Either way, it's a far cry from the subtle hint of lavender fabric softener you're used to. Your expensive modern perfume would probably surrender unconditionally in about 5 seconds out here. You're not quite awake yet. Are you hovering in that liminal space? That soft, fuzzy place between dreams and the less than dreamy reality that's slowly seeping in? There's a dull ache pressing into your hip, an unyielding point of contact with whatever surface you've been calling a bed. Not memory foam. Oh no. This is more of a stubborn refusal. You shift. Just a fraction, and a symphony of rustles answers you. Straw, perhaps, or maybe just a very, very old blanket, one that's seen more seasons than you have, whispering secrets of past sleepers, none of them particularly fragrant. And then there are the immediate dangers. We're not even talking about brigands or invading armies yet. Those are for a different kind of bad day. Further down this very old road. Right now, it's the environment itself that's looking for ways to gently, or not so gently, inconvenience you, possibly permanently. Remember those ankle-twisting cobblestones and mud pits? A twisted ankle or a fall could be a serious problem. No urgent care clinics, no readily available x-rays, no physiotherapist named Brenda to get you back on your feet. A broken bone could mean a lifetime of impairment, or worse, infection. Simple cuts and scrapes, easily treated today with a bit of antiseptic and a fun cartoon character plaster, could become festering wounds. Tetanus is just lurking in the dirt, waiting for an introduction. Loose animals are another concern, while most domestic animals are probably more interested in scavenging than attacking you. A startled dog, a protective sow with piglets, or even a particularly grumpy goose. And let me tell you, geese have not mellowed with age, could cause trouble. Wild animals might also venture closer to human settlements than you're comfortable with, especially on the outskirts or during the quiet hours of dawn and dusk. Think less, Bambi gracefully nibbling clover, and more. Something with sharp teeth and an opportunistic glint in its eye that sees you as a potential snack or, at best, an obstacle. And let's not forget the unseen dangers, the microscopic ninjas of the ancient world. Standing water, which is pretty much everywhere after rain, unless the drainage is surprisingly good, is a breeding ground for mosquitoes and other delightful insects, many of which carry diseases we now have vaccines or treatments for, but which were then potentially lethal fevers and fluxes. The very waste that contributes to the smellscape is also a haven for rats and other vermin, further vectors for illness. It's like an extreme version of that game The Floor is Lava, except the floor is mud, refuse, and potential injury. And the lava is, well, dysentery, typhoid, or something equally unpleasant. A bit of light humor there, but the reality was pretty grim. So maybe not that light. You quickly develop a keen sense of observation, constantly scanning the ground ahead, listening for unusual sounds, and generally adopting a state of heightened awareness that would make a seasoned spy proud. It's not paranoia if the uneven cobblestone is actually out to get you, or if that pile of refuse really is teeming with things that want to make you their new home. So, you're navigating this treacherous terrain, breathing in air thick enough to chew, and trying to avoid becoming an impromptu meal or a walking medical textbook illustration. It's a full-body workout. Really, you're using muscles you didn't know you had, mostly in your ankles and your core, just to stay upright and avoid face planting into something you'd rather not identify. Your senses are on high alert. This isn't just a stroll. It's an exercise in survival, even before you've properly started your day or achieved your first quest objective, like find edible bread. Every step is a minor victory. You think about how easily you move through your modern world, how much infrastructure and sanitation you take for granted every single day. Here, the simple act of walking down the street is an adventure, albeit one you might prefer to experience from the comfort of your couch, perhaps with a nice, clean-smelling candle burning nearby and absolutely no risk of contracting plague. But you're here now, aren't you? So, take another careful step. Watch out for that suspiciously dark puddle. It might be deeper than your entire shoe. And try not to breathe too deeply when you pass that pile of, well, you know. Onwards we go, into the heart of it all. And so, as the first gray light of dawn tentatively pokes through the cracks in your shutters, or perhaps just the open hole that serves as a window, you might find your thoughts turning to, well, breakfast. Or perhaps not. The very idea of a dedicated breakfast as you and I know it, that sit-down, three-course affair of cereal, toast, and existential dread before the commute, isn't quite a universal medieval experience. Historians still argue whether the concept of breakfast as a distinct, regular meal was widespread among all classes, or if it was more of an ad hoc affair for laborers needing quick energy before a long day's toil. Naj ti for many, especially the hard-working peasant. The morning might begin with a swig of small ale, a weak, low-alcohol brew, far safer than the often dubious water, and perhaps a hunk of dark, coarse rye or barley bread. Imagine the texture dense, heavy, something you really have to chew on, not your fluffy, pre-sliced nonsense. This isn't artisanal sourdough. It's fuel, pure and simple. If you're lucky, there might be a bit of yesterday's pottage, that ever-simmering stew of peas, beans, and whatever hearty vegetables could be coaxed from the garden, warmed up by the fire. You see, for the vast majority, life is a practical matter, and food is foremost about sustenance. There's no nipping out for a cheeky latte and a croissant. Your day, much like the one we might have touched upon earlier when discussing daily routines, is dictated by daylight and the demands of the land or your craft. So, a quick functional bite is often all that's on the menu, if anything at all, before you're out in the fields or at the workshop. Now, if you happen to be a bit higher up the social ladder, say a noble or a wealthy merchant, your morning might look a little different. You might indeed break your fast with something more substantial, perhaps some fine white bread, manchet bread, made from sifted wheat flour, a real status symbol. That. You might have wine instead of ale, some cheese, or even cold leftover meats from last night's rather more elaborate dinner. There's less rush, more comfort, and definitely better lighting than in that peasant's hut we just peeked into. The air in your solar, your private chamber, might even carry the faint, exotic scent of spices if your household is truly grand. A subtle reminder of the wealth that sets you apart. Regardless of your station, the preparation of food is a central and often laborious part of daily life. At the heart of most homes, rich or poor, is the fire. In simpler dwellings, it's an open hearth in the middle of the room, the smoke hopefully finding its way out through a hole in the roof. Your eyes are probably stinging a bit, and everything carries that distinct, smoky aroma. Your clothes, your hair, your very being. It's the medieval equivalent of that friend who always smells faintly of bonfire. In grander manors and castles, kitchens might be separate buildings entirely, partly to reduce the risk of catastrophic fires, and partly to keep the heat and smells away from the main living quarters. Imagine a bustling, hot, and noisy space, filled with the clang of pots, the sizzle of roasting meat, and the constant, arrhythmic chop 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 of vegetables. Your eyelids feel heavy, like tiny curtains weighted with lead, but a sliver of gray light, thin and unwelcome, insists on prying them open. It's not the cheerful, bright invitation of a modern morning. This light is grudging, filtered through a small, probably unglazed window, or maybe just cracks in the wooden walls of this. Let's call it a room. It illuminates a world of muted browns and grays. You can make out the rough texture of the wall closest to you. Splintered wood, perhaps, or daub and wattle, looking a bit like a giant, very stale cracker. Dust motes dance in that single weak beam, a silent, swirling galaxy of yesterday's grime. It's almost hypnotic. If you weren't so aware of the itch starting on your scalp, don't scratch it. Not yet. You know where that leads. The primary cooking method for many is boiling, that ubiquitous pottage we mentioned. It bubbles away in a cauldron suspended over the fire for hours, sometimes days, with ingredients added as they become available. It's a bit like a medieval, never-ending soup. Roasting, on a spit turned by hand, often a thankless job for a young kitchen boy, is more common for the wealthy who can afford larger cuts of meat. Baking, too, is a feature of medieval cuisine, though personal ovens are a luxury. Many villages would have a communal oven, where families could bring their dough to be baked for a small fee or a share of the bread. Your modern convection oven with its precise temperature controls and self-timer is, let's just say, still a few centuries off. No, here, you rely on skill, experience, and a healthy dose of hoping for the best. And because there's no refrigeration, remember, food preservation is an essential skill. Salting, smoking, drying, and pickling are how you make sure your harvest or your slaughtered animal lasts through the lean winter months. The taste of heavily salted meat or fish is something you'd get very accustomed to. The main meal of the day, for those who can afford it, isn't breakfast or supper, but dinner, typically served around mid-morning or noon. This is when, if you're in a noble household, the Great Hall truly comes alive. You take your place at long trestle tables, your position meticulously determined by your social rank. The Lord and his most honored guests sit at the high table, often on a raised dais, overlooking everyone else. It's dinner and a show, the show being the intricate dance of social hierarchy. And here's a mainstream historical fact for you. Bread was the absolute staple of the medieval diet for everyone. But the type of bread you ate spoke volumes. The lord at his high table gets that fine white man shit, while those further down the table, and certainly the peasantry, are eating a much darker, coarser bread made from rye, barley, or oats. Speaking of bread, let's talk about trenchers. This is a rather quirky, lesser-known tidbit. For many, particularly in earlier medieval times or less affluent settings, your plate might not be made of wood or pottery, but of stale bread. Yes, A thick slice of day-old or several days-old bread, called a trencher, would serve as your absorbent plate. You'd place your meat and other morsels on it, and it would soak up the juices and gravies. And at the end of the meal, you might eat your trencher if you were still hungry. Or, more commonly, it would be given as alms to the poor waiting outside, or even tossed to the dogs eagerly milling about under the tables. Waste not, want not, especially when your plate is edible. Don't worry, those table scraps aren't going to waste. Fido under the table is having a veritable feast, and probably better fed than some of the local villagers. If we're being honest, manners are different. You eat primarily with your fingers and a knife. Spoons are used for soups and pottages, but forks are still an exotic, almost suspicious, Italian novelty, not yet common in most of Europe. You'll share drinking cups with your table companions, and a servant might bring around a ewer of water and a basin for hand washing before the meal. Sometimes even scented with herbs or rose petals if you're fancy. It's a nice gesture, especially when you're about to dive in with both hands. As for what you're drinking, water is often viewed with suspicion, and for good reason. Sanitation isn't exactly top-notch. So, ale and beer are the beverages of choice for most people, including children. These are typically low in alcohol. Small beer, as it were, and the brewing process makes them safer than water from the local stream. The wealthy, of course, enjoy wine, often imported from France or Germany, and sometimes spiced with expensive additions like ginger, cloves, or grains of paradise. Your neighbor just got a shipment of wine with a hint of pepper. Oh, they're definitely showing off their connections and coin. Religious observance also plays a huge role in your diet. Fridays, and the entire period of Lent, along with various other saints' days and vigils, are fast days. This means no meat. For some, it also means no animal products at all, like eggs or dairy. So, fish becomes incredibly important, whether fresh from the river if you live near one, or salted and dried cod and herring transported far inland. Entire economies revolved around fishing and preserving fish for these numerous fast days. As evening draws in, there might be a lighter meal. Supper. This could be leftovers from dinner, some bread and cheese, or more pottage. It's a quieter, less formal affair than the midday dinner. And so, the culinary day comes to a close. A cycle of preparation and consumption deeply intertwined with the seasons, your social standing, and the ever-present rhythms of work and worship. You drift off to sleep, perhaps with the lingering taste of smoky stew, or, if you're very fortunate, a sweet, spiced wine, ready to do it all again when the sun rises. So, you've found your station, your little rung on that medieval ladder we were just peering at. Whether you're near the muddy bottom or a little further up, one thing's for certain: your day revolves around work, and not the kind of work you can mostly do in your pajamas while doom scrolling. Mostly. The sun is your unforgiving alarm clock, and your body is your primary tool. If you're a peasant, which, statistically speaking, you most likely are, your day starts before the sun even properly bothers to show its face. We're talking pre-dawn, before even the birds have had their first cup of warm Xeno. You pull on your rough, homespun tunic, maybe some ill-fitting leather shoes if you're lucky, and it's out into the damp, chill air. The smell of wood smoke from your neighbor's hut might mingle with the earthier scent of your own livestock. Your muscles, already aching from yesterday, protest as you pick up your tools. These aren't your fancy, modern, lightweight implements. Think heavy wood, crudely forged iron. No ergonomic handles back then, just good old-fashioned splinters as a daily bonus. Your entire year, your entire life, really, is dictated by the agricultural cycle. a truly mainstream historical fact of the era. Spring means plowing. You're behind a team of oxen. If your village is prosperous enough to share one, or perhaps you're even pulling a lighter plow yourself alongside a family member if times are truly tough. The thick, wet earth resists. Each furrow a monumental effort. Your shoulders burn, your back screams, but the fields must be turned. Then comes sowing, scattering precious seed by hand, hoping for kind weather and a good yield, because a bad harvest doesn't mean slightly more expensive bread. It means actual hunger, a gaunt shadow over the winter months. The air itself has a personality. It's thick, a cocktail of scents you'd never find in a Yankee Candle. There's the lingering ghost of wood smoke, acrid and a little bit comforting, like a distant memory of warmth. But underneath that, oh boy, there's the undeniable funk of unwashed bodies, a human musk that's both intimately familiar and deeply unsettling. Yours, theirs, who can tell anymore? It's a communal aroma, the signature scent of close living, and maybe, just maybe, a faint whiff of whatever livestock decided to bunk nearby. Remember, separate barns, or even separate rooms for animals, weren't always a given, a standard we take for granted. For many, cohabitation with livestock was the norm, especially in colder climes, a sort of furry, four-legged central heating. Historians still argue whether the general populace truly became nose blind to these pervasive odors, or if it was a constant, low-level assault on the senses. Summer brings its own relentless tasks. Weeding, always weeding, under a sun that beats down mercilessly. You feel the sweat trickling down your spine, the chafe of your rough clothing, and then the culmination harvest. Everyone, men, women, children, is out in the fields from first light to last. You're wielding a sickle, a curved blade that requires a constant stooping, swinging motion, slice, gather, bind, slice, gather, bind. The stubble pricks your ankles, dust fills your lungs. It's backbreaking, repetitive, and absolutely essential. Threshing follows, beating the grain from the stalks, often with a flail, a task that demands rhythm and care, lest you whack yourself instead of the wheat. You feel the vibration up your arms with every thud. Your world is a cycle of planting and reaping, governed by sunlight and saints' days, with very few actual days off, again, as we'd recognize them. Now, if you're an artisan living in a burgeoning town, your workday has a different rhythm, but it's no less demanding. You wake with the church bells, perhaps a little later than the farmer, but your day is still long. As a blacksmith, you're up early to get the forge roaring. The heat is intense, a constant companion. You feel it on your face, your arms, as you pump the bellows, the rhythmic whoosh of familiar sound. Then the clang of hammer on anvil, shaping glowing metal with practiced, powerful blows. Sparks fly, stinging your skin. Your arms are thick with muscle, your hands calloused and strong. You're making tools for the farmers, shoes for horses, maybe even parts of armor if your skill is renowned. Or perhaps you're a weaver. You sit at your loom for hours, the clatter of the shuttle a constant soundtrack. Your fingers deftly guide the threads, creating cloth for tunics, blankets, or fine tapestries if you're highly skilled. The work is intricate, requiring concentration and a good eye, but it's also physically taxing on your back and shoulders from sitting in one position. Bakers, of course, are up even earlier than blacksmiths, kneading dough in the pre-dawn dark, the warm, yeasty smell a comfort to the early risers in town. Their arms ache from the constant pushing and folding. Cobblers, carpenters, masons, brewers. Each craft has its own set of physical demands, its own unique symphony of sounds and smells. Many of you are part of a guild, which regulates quality, prices, and the long path of apprenticeship. often 7 years, which is, you know, just about how long it feels to wait for your takeaway on a busy Friday night. These guilds can offer a sense of community and security, but they also demand strict adherence to their rules. Interestingly, for some urban workers, there's a quirky little custom that sometimes emerges: Saint Monday. It's not an official holiday, but a kind of collectively agreed upon extension of the weekend, much to the annoyance of employers. A little bit of breathing room in an otherwise relentless schedule. And what about other types of work? If you're a parish priest, you're not just tending to souls, you might also be tending your own glebe-land, a plot of farmland that comes with the job, meaning you're no stranger to blisters and an aching back yourself. Monks, too. Live by the rule of ora et labora, pray and work. This work could be agricultural, within the monastery's extensive lands, or it could be the meticulous, eye-straining labor of copying manuscripts in the scriptorium, hunched over a desk for hours, quill in hand. The silence broken only by the scratch of pen on parchment and the occasional sigh. Even for the nobility, life isn't all feasting and tournaments, especially for the lower rungs or those managing estates. If you're a knight or a lesser lord, you're overseeing your lands, which means understanding agriculture, managing tenants who are doing that backbreaking labor we talked about, and ensuring the estate runs smoothly. It's a different kind of work, more administrative, perhaps, but with its own pressures. Noblewomen, too, have their domain, the household. This isn't just idle supervision. It's a complex logistical operation, managing servants, food stores, the production of textiles, and often the family finances. Their physical work might be the endless, intricate needlework, creating tapestries or embroidering clothes, a task that demands patience and skill and could certainly lead to its own strains on eyes and hands. Historians still argue whether the strict division of labor by gender, so often described in official texts and sermons, was as absolute in practice, especially in poorer agricultural families where everyone's contribution was vital for survival. So, you see, your day, almost regardless of your station, is defined by tasks that need doing, by a physicality that shapes your body and your endurance. The sun climbs, peaks, and begins its descent, and you work through it all, fueled by simple food, bread, pottage, ale, and the knowledge that tomorrow will bring much of the same. The rhythm of labor is the heartbeat of this medieval world, a constant, thrumming presence beneath the surface of everything else. It's tiring, often monotonous, but it's the very fabric of your existence. Okay, so you've managed to find some, basic sustenance, like we talked about with that lovely pottage. And perhaps you've even found a place to lay your head that isn't entirely crawling with things that bite. Progress. But now comes the truly tricky part, the one that makes dodging dysentery look like a walk in the park, navigating medieval society. It's less a society as you might know it, and more like an incredibly strict, multi-leveled wedding cake, where everyone knows their layer and, trust me, you do not want to be the cherry trying to chat up the marzipan. You try to take a deeper breath, a mistake you instantly regret. Your mouth tastes, well, it tastes like you haven't seen a toothbrush in your entire life, which, let's be fair, you probably haven't. That minty fresh feeling. Pure science fiction in this particular timeline. It's a furry, stagnant pool of yesterday's whatever you ate, and the night's bacterial party. You run your tongue over your teeth. Don't. Just don't. It's not pleasant. Imagine your worst morning breath, then multiply it by a factor of ancient grains and no fluoride. We're talking about a level of oral miasma that could probably wilt flowers. It's a wonder anyone ever got close enough for a morning kiss. though perhaps standards were different, or maybe they just held their breath. A lot. You see, this whole world operates on a pretty rigid structure. Think of it like your modern office, but instead of intern, middle management, and CEO who plays golf all day, you have those who pray, those who fight, and those who work. That's the classic mainstream historical fact for you, the three estates, the oratory's clergy, the bellatory's nobility, the fighters, and the laborators, everyone else, doing all the actual labor, naturally. And guess which one you, my dear time-traveling friend, are most likely to be a part of? Yeah, no prizes for that one. It's probably not the one with the silk robes or the shiny armor. So, let's say you're ambling down a muddy track, trying to look like you belong. Up ahead, you see a group approaching. How do you know who's who? Well, clothing is a big giveaway. Remember those sumptuary laws we sort of brushed past? This is where they really shine. Or rather, dictate who gets to shine. That fellow on the magnificent warhorse, decked out in velvet, and perhaps a bit of fur trim, even if it's sweltering hot, definitely nobility. The chap in the simple, probably undyed woolen tunic, looking a bit downtrodden. Your people? And the one in the sober, dark robes, maybe with a tonsure, that distinctive medieval monk haircut clergy. It's like a color-coded system for social anxiety. Now, interacting? This is where it gets delicate. If you encounter a noble, say the Lord Brian de Thicket, I just made him up, but he sounds suitably imposing, doesn't he? You don't just nod and say, "All right, mate." Oh no, you bow. Or, if you're female, you curtsy. How low you go depends on their rank and yours. But as a general rule, assume you're scraping the mud with your nose. Maintain eye contact. Are you mad eyes down? Respectful. And for goodness sake, don't initiate conversation unless you absolutely have to. They might speak to you, perhaps to demand why you're blocking their very important path, or to ask for directions to the nearest peasant they can exploit. Your responses should be brief, exceedingly polite, and probably involve a lot of "my-lord" or "my-lady." Think of it as dealing with a particularly tetchy celebrity, but with the added risk of being clapped in irons if you get it wrong. The nobility, amongst themselves, have their own elaborate codes. You'll hear talk of chivalry, brave knights, defending the weak, all that jazz. It's an ideal. Sometimes practiced, often creatively interpreted. They also engage in something called courtly love, which is this very stylized, often unconsummated, adoration of a highborn lady. It involves writing bad poetry and sighing a lot. It's basically the medieval equivalent of sliding into someone's DMs with a sonnet. Then there's the clergy, from the humble village priest, who might actually be fairly approachable and probably knows all the local gossip, to the powerful bishops and abbots who are essentially nobles in robes. You'll interact with the church constantly. Mass, baptisms, marriages, funerals. They've got the monopoly on all the big life events. You pay your tithes, a tenth of your produce, which, when you're barely scraping by, feels like a lot more than 10%. You confess your sins, hoping Father Michael isn't too judgmental about you eyeing that extra turnip last week. Generally, you treat them with deep respect. They hold the keys to heaven, or so everyone believes. So best not to annoy the gatekeepers. And then there are your fellow laboratories, the peasants, the serfs, the villains. This is your social circle, your support network, such as it is. Here, things are a bit more relaxed, but there's still a pecking order. The reeve, who's like the village foreman appointed by the Lord, has some authority. Older, more established families might carry more weight. You'll share tools, help each other during harvest, and grumble about the Lord's demands together. It's a community born of shared hardship. You'll know who owes whom a favor, whose pig is the fattest, and whose ale is the least likely to make you go blind. But what about climbing that social ladder? Can you, a humble turnip farmer, become Sir Reginald, wearer of shiny pants? Unlikely. Extremely unlikely. Social mobility is, shall we say, glacially slow. Your birth largely dictates your entire life. If you're born a serf, tied to the land, you'll almost certainly die a serf. Your children will be serfs. It's the ultimate generational curse. But with more mud, there are rare exceptions. Of course, a particularly clever or lucky lad might get an education through the church and rise through its ranks. A soldier might distinguish himself spectacularly in battle and be granted a minor title. But these are the medieval lottery winners. For most, the station you're born into is the station you're stuck in. It's less a ladder and more of a very, very sticky fly trap. Historians still argue whether the concept of feudalism as a neat, uniform system ever truly existed across all of medieval Europe, or if it's more of a convenient, later construct to describe a very messy reality. Because it was messy. Local customs varied wildly. What was accepted in one village might be an outrageous offense in the next. So, the key to survival, socially speaking, is observation and deference. Watch how others behave, mimic them, and when in doubt, be humble. Overly humble. Grovel a bit if you have to. It's better than the alternative. Because stepping out of line, challenging the established order, even accidentally, can have severe consequences. Disrespect a noble. You could be fined, flogged, imprisoned, or worse. Question the church. That's heresy. My friend and they have some very creative ways of dealing with that, often involving fire. Even among your fellow peasants, breaking established customs could lead to ostracism, which in a world where community is everything, could be a death sentence in itself. One quirky little tidbit for you: sumptuary laws didn't just cover the type of fabric, like silk or velvet. They often specified colors. Certain shades of purple or crimson might be reserved solely for royalty or the highest nobility. So, if you happen to find a particularly vibrant patch of berries and think, ooh, I could dye my tunic a lovely royal purple, maybe don't. It's the medieval equivalent of wearing a fake designer handbag. But instead of a cease and desist letter, you get a visit from someone with a very large stick. It's all about ensuring everyone knows their place, visually reinforcing that rigid wedding cake structure we talked about. You wouldn't want the peasants getting above themselves, looking too colorful. Now would you? Your hair feels like a greasy helmet, plastered to your skull in some places, sticking out in defiant clumps in others. Heavy and lank. The idea of shampoo, of warm water cascading through it, washing away the grime, pure fantasy. You might, if you're lucky, get to dunk your head in a cold stream later, or perhaps just comb it through with your fingers, redistributing the natural oils. So many oils. It's a bit like a badly maintained oil slick, really. And the skin. Oh, your skin. It's sticky, a fine film of sweat, grime, and whatever else has decided to adhere to you through the night. You can feel it under your fingernails if you dare to scrape a tiny patch on your arm. That slight grittiness, the evidence of a world without daily showers, without soap as we know it. So, you keep your head down. You learn the local rules of who bows to whom, who gets the better cut of meat, hint, not you, and who you absolutely, under no circumstances, make eye contact with for too long. It's exhausting. Frankly, it makes modern office politics look like a delightful tea party, but it's essential. Your ability to understand and perform your role within this intricate, often unwritten, social dance is just as crucial as finding food or shelter. Misstep, and the dance floor could swallow you whole. Now, speaking of things swallowing you whole, let's consider the less metaphorical dangers lurking just beyond the village. And so, as you drift through these medieval landscapes, feeling the rough wool of your tunic, perhaps smelling that distant wood smoke we talked about, it's easy to get a bit romantic about it all. The tapestries, the grand halls, the idea of simple, earthy living. But like any good dream that's just a little too peaceful, there's always the chance that things, well, take a sharp turn. Because underneath the surface of chivalry and piety, there's a system for when things go spectacularly wrong. And let me tell you, it's not exactly a gentle slap on the wrist. You see, the medieval justice system isn't like popping down to the local courthouse with a sharply dressed lawyer. Oh no. It's a wonderfully, terrifyingly unpredictable beast. What might get you a stern talking to in one village could see you, well, significantly shorter in another. So much depends on where you are, who you are, and frankly, what kind of mood the local lord is in. Remember that powerful lord we saw feasting in his great hall? He's not just there for the roasted boar and endless wine. He's often the judge, jury, and sometimes the guy who greenlights the rather grim finale. It's less innocent until proven guilty, and more, hope the lord had a good breakfast and isn't currently nursing a toothache. Your social standing, that ladder of society we've touched upon, plays a massive role. A noble might get away with a hefty fine for an offense that sees a peasant like you facing something far more permanent and brutal. That's putting it mildly. Justice, or what passes for it, is often a very public, very visceral affair. The idea is not just to punish the wrongdoer, but to make a very clear, very memorable example for everyone else. Think of it as a really intense, medieval public service announcement, only with more screaming. You can almost feel the collective shiver that runs through the crowd in the market square, that same square where you might have haggled for some bread earlier, when the guards drag a shouting unfortunate towards the stocks. So, what kind of trouble could you actually get into? Well, the list of common crimes is both familiar and uniquely medieval. Theft is a classic, of course. Pinching a loaf of bread because your stomach is echoing might get you a different response than, say, rustling a few of the Lord's prize-winning sheep. Then there's poaching, those lush forests we imagined, teeming with deer and boar. Most of that is off limits to common folk. That venison is reserved for the nobility, and taking a deer could be seen as directly stealing from the Lord himself. Apparently, sharing is caring didn't extend to the king's venison, or the duke's, or even the local knight's rabbit. Brawling and assault are pretty common too. With ale flowing as freely as it often did, and life being generally quite tough, tempers could flare easily. A drunken fight outside the tavern could escalate quickly. Then you have more serious offenses. Heresy, speaking out against the church or its doctrines, is a particularly dangerous path. The church wields immense power, and challenging it is not taken lightly. And, of course, treason. Any act against your king or feudal lord is the ultimate crime, with punishments to match. Even something as seemingly simple as falling into debt could land you in serious trouble, potentially leading to a form of indentured servitude or a grim stay in a debtor's prison. If such a luxury exists where you are now, how is your guilt or innocence actually determined? Forget DNA evidence or a lengthy trial with cross-examinations. Often, an accusation is enough to get the ball rolling, and due process is a concept still several centuries away from its coffee break. One rather infamous method, particularly in the earlier medieval period, was trial by ordeal. This is a mainstream historical fact you might have heard of. The idea was that God would intervene to show the truth. You might be forced to carry a red-hot iron bar for a set distance. Your hand would be bandaged, and after a few days, if the wound was healing cleanly, you were innocent. If it was festering, well, God had spoken. Or perhaps you'd be thrown into a river. Remember those chilly streams if you sank. You were innocent and hopefully pulled out quickly. If you floated, the water being pure was seen as rejecting you, thus proving your guilt. Thankfully, the Church, particularly after the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215, began to frown upon these methods, realizing that perhaps divine intervention wasn't quite as predictable as a barista getting your coffee order wrong. And for a truly quirky, lesser-known tidbit, it wasn't just humans who could find themselves on the wrong side of the law. Animals could be, and were formally put on trial. Imagine a pig. Let's call him Bartholomew. Accused of injuring a child, Bartholomew would be arrested, imprisoned. Yes, really, Nug, and brought before a court, sometimes with a lawyer appointed for his defense. Witnesses would testify, and if found guilty, Bartholomew could be sentenced to death, often by hanging, just like a human criminal. There are actual court records of such cases, which is both fascinating and slightly absurd from our modern perspective. Once you're found guilty, through ordeal, witness testimony, or simply because the Lord doesn't like the cut of your jib, the punishments are designed to be memorable. Fines are common, especially for those who can pay, and they're a handy source of income for the authorities. But for many, especially the poor, it's about public shame and physical pain. You might find yourself in the stocks or the pillory, those wooden contraptions we've seen in depictions of medieval towns. Your arms and head, or your ankles, are locked in place, usually in the busiest part of town, like that market square. You're exposed to the elements and to the jeers, rotten fruit, and general unpleasantness hurled by the public. Their idea of community service was, well, serving as a public example of what not to do. It's a bit more intense than picking up litter on the highway. While soap, in rudimentary forms, has been around for ages, the Babylonians were making it around 2800 BC. A mainstream historical fact for you there. Widespread, daily personal use by everyone. That's a much more recent development. For now, you're rocking the au naturel look and smell. Whipping or flogging is another popular choice for instilling discipline. The sharp sting of the lash, a painful reminder of your transgression. For more serious crimes, especially repeat offenses like theft, mutilation was on the table. You might be branded with a hot iron, marking you for life as a criminal. A thief might lose a hand, a perjurer their tongue. It's brutal, yes, but it serves as a constant, visible warning to others. Imprisonment, as we think of it, with rehabilitation programs and libraries, is largely non-existent. Dungeons are dark, damp, filthy places, often just holding cells while you await a more definitive punishment, or if you're a political prisoner of some importance. For most common folk, long-term imprisonment isn't the goal. A swifter, more decisive, and cheaper resolution is preferred. Banishment is another option, casting you out from your community, which in a world where your village is your entire support system, could be a death sentence in itself. And then, of course, there's execution. Hanging is common for ordinary criminals. Beheading, often seen as a more honorable death, might be reserved for nobles. The methods are grim, public, and designed to inspire maximum terror. Historians still argue whether the primary aim of such public punishment was pure deterrence, scaring the populace into obedience, or if it served a more ritualistic function, a symbolic display of the lord's or king's power and their ability to restore order to the community, no matter how violently. It's a stark reminder, isn't it? As you listen to the distant sounds of the night, perhaps the hoot of an owl or the rustle of leaves, be thankful that the only judgment you face is whether to click like on this video. The medieval world, for all its rustic charm, had a very, very sharp edge when things went wrong. You certainly wouldn't want to be caught on the wrong side of its justice, where mercy is a rare commodity and the consequences are all too real and all too permanent. And as you wander away from the bustling, slightly chaotic marketplace we just explored, perhaps with the scent of those meat pies still faintly in the air, you start to feel a little off. Not surprising, really. After all, life in this era isn't exactly a wellness retreat. So, let's talk about what happens when you're not feeling your best. When those medieval aches and ailments start to creep in. You see, your understanding of health is fundamentally different. Forget WebMD or a quick trip to the pharmacy. Your body, everyone believes, is governed by 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Think of them as the original elements of your internal weather system. Too much blood. You're sanguine, perhaps a bit too excitable. Too much phlegm. Phlegmatic, calm, maybe a tad sluggish. An excess of yellow bile makes you choleric, fiery and quick to anger, and too much black bile. Melancholic, a bit down, a bit broody. Health is all about keeping these humors in perfect, delicate balance. Illness. That's just your humors having a bit of a tantrum, one of them deciding to hog the spotlight. It's a wonderfully simple system, in a terrifyingly misinformed kind of way. So, you wake up one morning, maybe in that cozy, reed-drafty cottage we imagined, and your head is pounding. Your throat feels like you've swallowed a handful of that rough wool we saw the weavers working with. What's your first thought? Probably not. I should drink more water. More likely, it's, oh dear, my humors are staging a coup. The air itself. Remember those miasmas we talked about wafting through the towns? Bad air, or malaria, is considered a prime culprit for many sicknesses. And hygiene? Well, let's just say that the communal bathhouse, while a social hub, wasn't exactly a sterile environment. And personal bathing, while more common than some myths suggest, wasn't a daily hot water and antibacterial soap affair. So, tiny invisible beasties have a much easier time setting up shop. Common diseases are, well, common. You hear a lot about the bloody flux, which is a rather evocative term for dysentery. Given the water sources and food preparation we've glimpsed, it's not hard to see why this would be a frequent, and often fatal, visitor. The sniffles, a cough, what we'd call a cold or flu, can lay you low for weeks, and without modern medicine, it can easily turn into something more sinister like pneumonia. Then there are the skin conditions, scabies, ringworm, various rashes that thrive in less than spotless conditions. You might see folks with patches of discolored skin or missing fingers and toes, shunned to the edge of villages. That's likely leprosy, a truly devastating disease, not just for the physical toll, but for the social isolation it brought. Leper houses, or lazar houses, were a common sight outside many towns, a testament to both compassion and fear. A particularly nasty ailment you might encounter, especially if you're in an area that relies heavily on rye bread, is Saint Anthony's fire. This isn't some divine retribution, but ergotism, caused by a fungus that can grow on damp rye. It could cause horrific burning sensations in the limbs, hence the fire or hallucinations, convulsions, and even gangrene. Imagine your daily bread, the very staff of life, turning against you. It's a chilling thought. Of course, the ever-present shadow looming over everyone is the plague, while the Black Death of the mid-14th century was a cataclysmic event, wiping out a staggering portion of Europe's population. That's our mainstream historical fact for this section: the sheer demographic devastation of the Black Death. Plague, in various forms, remained a recurring terror for centuries. The suddenness of its onset, the terrifying symptoms like buboes, those swollen lymph nodes, and the sheer speed with which it could decimate a community left an indelible mark on the medieval psyche. There's an itch on your leg now, insistent. You try to ignore it, focusing instead on the symphony of a pre-modern morning starting up around you. A cough, deep and chesty, from the other side of the thin partition, or perhaps just from the other side of the communal sleeping heap. Someone groans. A baby starts to cry, a thin, reedy wail that cuts through the morning fog. Outside, a rooster, bless its punctual heart, is crowing its little lungs out, completely oblivious to your suffering. It sounds aggressively cheerful, too cheerful. You almost wish a fox would get it. But then you remember fresh eggs are probably on the menu if you're lucky. Or more likely, if the rooster itself isn't. Priorities. You know. So, you're sick. What do? Well, you might first turn to prayer and local folk remedies. Your village might have a wise woman, skilled in herbs. Some of these herbal treatments, passed down through generations, actually had some beneficial properties. Willow bark, for instance, contains salicin, a precursor to aspirin. But many remedies were based on the doctrine of signatures, the idea that a plant's appearance hinted at its use. So, a lung-shaped leaf for a cough, or a yellow flower for jaundice. It's a quirky little tidbit, this doctrine of signatures, a sort of botanical charades for healing. Sometimes it worked by sheer coincidence. Other times, well, at least the tea tasted interesting. If home remedies fail, you might seek out a more professional opinion. This could be a university-trained physician, if you're wealthy and in a large town. They'll gravely examine your urine, its color, clarity, smell, even taste was a key diagnostic tool. They'll consult charts linking illnesses to astrological alignments because, yes, the stars are also involved in your health. Because why not add another layer of cosmic complication to your fever? And then come the treatments, the go-to for almost anything. The medieval equivalent of, have you tried turning it off and on again, is bloodletting. The theory: you have too much of the blood humor, or bad blood, so let's just get some of it out. This could be done by opening a vein with a phlegm, a small, sharp lancet, or, for a more targeted approach, leeches. Yes, those slimy little suckers. They'd be applied to specific parts of your body, believed to draw out the corrupt blood. You might feel a bit lightheaded afterwards, which was probably interpreted as the badness leaving your body, rather than, blood loss. If bloodletting isn't deemed sufficient, perhaps a good purge is in order. Emetics to make you vomit, or laxatives to, well, you get the idea. The goal is to expel the imbalanced humors from any available exit. Some of the concoctions used for this were truly potent, and frankly, rather alarming. Think ingredients that sound more at home in a witch's cauldron than a pharmacy. Surgery is an absolute last resort, and for good reason. Remember those barber surgeons we might have seen with their striped poles? They were your guys for pulling teeth, setting bones, lancing boils, and even amputations. Anesthesia. Not really a thing beyond perhaps a hefty dose of alcohol or opium, if you were lucky. antiseptics, and germ theory. Centuries away, so any surgical procedure was incredibly risky, with infection being an almost guaranteed complication. Historians still argue whether some of the more invasive procedures, like trepanation, drilling a hole in the skull to release pressure or evil spirits, actually provided any relief or just hastened the inevitable. It's a grim picture, seeing someone take a drill to a skull with only the best, albeit misguided, intentions. Sometimes treatments involved powdered gemstones, believing their preciousness imbued them with healing power. Or, for a less glamorous option, various animal products, including dung, might be incorporated into poultices or potions. It's a far cry from our sterile, evidence-based medicine, isn't it? Yet, through it all, there's a deep human desire to heal, to alleviate suffering, even if the methods are questionable by our standards. You see people genuinely trying, using the knowledge they have, however flawed it might seem to us now. And amidst the fear and the often painful cures, there's also resilience and the quiet hope that tomorrow the humors might just decide to behave themselves. For now, though, you just lie there, perhaps with a poultice of something unidentifiable on your chest, listening to the rain and hoping this particular ache doesn't turn into something that requires the barber surgeon's rather enthusiastic attention. You can almost taste the incense, even miles from the nearest church. Or maybe that's just the lingering scent of wood smoke from all those hearths we passed. But more than that, there's an unseen, yet utterly palpable presence that dictates the rhythm of every single day here. It's the constant low hum beneath the surface of Life God, the saints, and, of course, a healthy dose of good old-fashioned superstition. You can't swing a stray cat, though please don't, animal welfare and all that, without hitting some aspect of religious belief. You wake not to an alarm clock. What a horrifying thought that would be for them, but likely to the distant, sometimes slightly off-key, clang of church bells. Those bells, they're the medieval equivalent of your smartphone notifications, telling you when to pray, when major feast days are happening, sometimes even tolling for fires or important news. The entire calendar, the very way you perceive time, is structured around the church. Forget your neat January to December. Think more in terms of before or after Easter, or how many weeks it is until St. Swithin's Day, where, if it rains, you're apparently in for 40 more days of drizzle. Fun. The church building itself, often the only stone structure in a village full of those wattle and daub huts. Remember those, it looms large, a physical manifestation of divine authority and, let's be honest, worldly power. Inside, it's dim, cool even on a warm day. Light filters through stained glass, if the village is prosperous enough to afford it, painting shifting patterns on the stone floor. Otherwise, it's probably narrow slits of windows, keeping the gloom mostly intact. You'd smell old stone, beeswax candles, and that ever-present incense, a scent designed to lift the prayers and perhaps mask less heavenly odors from the less than ideally washed congregation. The village priest. He's your main point of contact with this divine infrastructure. He might be a learned man, or he might barely be able to stumble through the Latin Mass himself. Literacy wasn't exactly universal, even among the clergy, especially in more remote areas. He christens you when you're born, a crucial step to wash away original sin and ensure your soul isn't immediately whisked away by mischievous imps. He presides over your marriage, binding you not just to your spouse, but also to the laws of the church. And, of course, he'll be there for your last rites, preparing your soul for the journey ahead. A busy man. Our priest, often juggling spiritual duties with managing church lands and perhaps even a bit of farming on the side, hoping his turnips turn out better than his sermons. The discomfort isn't just about the dirt, is it? It's the deep-seated ache in your bones. Your back is stiff. Your neck is protesting the lack of a supportive pillow. Was that a rock you were using? Or just a conveniently wadded up bit of rag? Your joints crackle like dry kindling as you contemplate the Herculean effort of sitting up. It's a full-body announcement that you are indeed awake and that your bed was, indeed, terrible. This isn't the gentle soreness after a good workout. This is the protest of a body that's been poorly treated by its sleeping arrangements. You can almost hear your vertebrae sighing in relief as you finally, slowly, push yourself upright. The blood rushes to your head a little. Or maybe it's just the stale air finally getting to you. Now, about those services. You shuffle into the church, the rough fabric of your tunic brushing against others. The Mass is in Latin, a language you almost certainly don't understand beyond a few repeated phrases. Historians still argue whether the common folk truly understood the Latin Mass, or if it was more about the ritual and sensory experience. The chanting, the priest's elaborate vestments, the symbolic gestures, the ringing of the Sanctus bell. It was a performance, in a way designed to inspire awe and devotion, even if the theological nuances were a bit fuzzy, like watching a foreign film without subtitles. But with more guilt, you're expected to contribute. 2. Tithing, giving a tenth of your produce or income to the church, was a serious obligation. And it's no wonder, really, because the church was the largest landowner in medieval Europe. A colossal institution with immense wealth and influence, shaping politics and daily life far beyond the village green. They had more land than a particularly greedy dragon, and probably better lawyers. But the official church, with its grand pronouncements and Latin liturgies, is only part of the story. Your personal spiritual landscape is also crowded with saints. So many saints. Saints for everything. Got a toothache? There's a saint for that. Saint Apollonia, usually depicted with tongs and a tooth, which is visually specific and not at all alarming. Losing your keys, or perhaps your favorite turnip-digging spade Saint Anthony. Of course, the original Lost and Found. These aren't distant, abstract figures. They're like celestial customer service representatives, ready to intercede on your behalf if you offer the right prayers, light a candle, or perhaps make a small pilgrimage to their shrine. It's a very practical, very personal kind of faith, like having a divine speed dial. And sometimes, this veneration took some wonderfully strange turns. For example, here's a little something for you in some parts of France. Local people venerated a greyhound, Saint Ginfort, as a protector of infants. Yes, a dog saint. The story goes that Ginfort heroically saved a baby from a venomous snake, was then tragically and mistakenly killed by the baby's returning father, who assumed the bloody dog had harmed the child. And then, naturally, miracles started happening at his grave. The official church was, shall we say, less than thrilled about canine canonization and tried repeatedly to stamp it out, deeming it superstitious nonsense. But the devotion persisted for centuries. People, we'll find a way to make anything holy if it seems to help, even if it barks. Beyond the saints, there's a whole universe of local superstitions, a rich tapestry woven from ancient folklore, half-remembered pagan beliefs, and a general desire to make sense of a world that often feels chaotic and dangerous. Remember those dark woods we talked about, and the things that might lurk there? Well, you've got charms for that. A sprig of rowan tucked into your belt to ward off evil spirits, or perhaps a particular stone carried in your pocket for good luck. You might avoid walking under a ladder, not because of some OSHA violation waiting to happen, but because it's just unlucky. A breach in the natural order of things. Spilled salt. Oh, you better throw some over your left shoulder. Quick, before a demon, presumably one with a penchant for poorly seasoned food, sneaks up on you. It sounds a bit silly to us now. Perhaps like when you refuse to step on cracks in the pavement for fear of upsetting your mother's vertebral alignment. But for people then, these little rituals provided a sense of control, a way to navigate the uncertainties of life. Many of these beliefs weren't seen as being in opposition to Christianity, but rather as complementary to it, existing in a sort of spiritual symbiosis. The local wise woman, the one who knows her herbs and can brew a poultice for that nasty cough you've developed from all the damp and smoke, might also know a few quiet words to say over it, a little spell to encourage healing. This is the realm of Watan white magic, if you will, practices intended to help, to heal, to protect. It's a bit of a gray area. Of course, the line between a folk remedy accompanied by a prayer and an outright magical incantation could be perilously thin, and the church was always wary of things that smacked too much of old pagan ways, or, worse, demonic influence. They preferred their magic to come with official robes and incense. Thank you very much. You'll hear whispers about bad luck, about the evil eye, about curses laid by a slighted neighbor whose prize-winning pig you accidentally complimented a bit, too enthusiastically. If your cow suddenly stops giving milk, or your bread stubbornly refuses to rise, it's easy to suspect something more sinister than just poor animal husbandry or a bad batch of yeast. It might be witchcraft, though the terrifying organized witch hunts with their bonfires and mass hysteria are largely a feature of a later period. Right now, it's more localized, more personal, a fear of malevolent individuals using unseen forces for harm. So, you take precautions. You hang a horseshoe over your door, points up, of course to keep the luck in, not let it all spill out like poorly stored ale. Or you mutter a quick prayer if you see a single magpie, a notorious harbinger of sorrow. It's all part of the same complex belief system, where the divine, the saintly, and the subtly magical are all just different threads in the grand, often bewildering, fabric of existence. Every creak of the floorboards in your hut, every shadow in the corner of your eye, could be something more. So you light your candle, say your prayers, maybe cross your fingers behind your back just in case, and hope for the best. It's a lot to keep track of. Really, you'd almost need a spiritual day planner if, you know, planners or widespread literacy were a common thing. The sun, that relentless celestial timekeeper we were just discussing, now hangs almost directly overhead, beating down with a surprising intensity. Even if you're indoors, you feel that familiar, gentle gnawing in your stomach, a subtle reminder that the morning's energy expenditure, whether it was spent toiling in a field, hunched over a craft, or perhaps just trying to look busy for your demanding overlord, requires a top-up. It's time for the midday refuel. This isn't your meticulously planned, Tupperware-contained, macro-counted lunch of the modern era. Oh no, this is something far more elemental.